former Labour leader, Lord Kinnock, is advocating for a wealth tax in this country. He's advocating for a 2% tax on assets over 10 million quid. Now, 2% on 10 million quid is something that you've probably heard about before. It's a number that's been bandied around quite a bit in this conversation about wealth tax. But what I want to talk about in this video is the position the government finds themselves in after last week and the failed welfare reform bill, because they're going to have to face a real interesting dilemma and have to make some really difficult choices. And to be honest, after seeing Rachel Reeves cry last week, I wonder whether or not Labour is actually up to the task of making these types of decisions. Because if they don't take this consideration, this suggestion from Lord Kinnock into account, then it effectively means that they're going to have to do something that they said they were not going to do in their party manifesto when they were running to win the election last year. But before we get into that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please consider subscribing. Please smash the like button so other people can also get involved in this conversation as well. Let's have a little listen to Lord Kinnock on Sky talking about this idea of a wealth tax.
I said a couple of years ago, in actually defending the caution of the opposition, led brilliantly, in my view, by Keir Starmer. And it was that the essential disciplined caution of opposition won't be allowed to become stiffness or stagnation in government. Now, unfortunately, the appearance has been given, it's not actually the accurate picture, but the appearance has been given that they have bogged down by their own imposed limitations. There are ways around that, ways out of it, pathways that I think people are willing to explore and actually would commend themselves to the great majority of the general public. They include, for instance, asset taxes in a period in which, for the last 20 odd years in the United Kingdom, like quite a lot of other Western economies, earned incomes have stagnated in real terms, while asset values have zoomed. They've just gone through the roof.
Houses,
and they've been
all of that.
barely touched, absolutely. And they've been barely touched. Now, you wouldn't have to touch assets of under 6 or 7 million, so people's houses would be secure, obviously. But even by going for an imposition of 2% on asset values above 10 million, say, which is a very big fortune, the government would be in a position to collect 10 or 11 billion a year. Now, that's not going to pay all the bills, but it does two things, or that kind of levy does two things. One is to secure resources, which is very important, revenues. But the second thing it does is to say to the country, we are the government of equity. And this is a country which is very substantially fed up with the fact that whatever happens in the world, whatever happens in the UK, the same interests come out on top, unscathed all the time, while everybody else is paying more for gutted services.
Now that right there is a former Labour leader. I mean, he led the Labour Party between 1983 and 1992. And he made a couple of really good points in this. We are definitely in a world where it doesn't matter what happens globally. It doesn't matter what happens here in the UK. There is a certain segment of society that will always be insulated against any kind of catastrophe, financial crisis, call it whatever you want, because they have the asset base around them where those kind of things do not shock them. The people that do bear the burden of financial crises, of lockdowns, will be lower income and middle class earning homes, households in the UK. And that right there impacts social mobility. You know, I come from a very low income household, being able to get into the middle class. How do you make that transition from middle class to the 1% or high earners if everything is fighting against you? That is the argument for this wealth tax. He also mentioned something else. He said, you know, Labour have this self-imposed limitation. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, because it is all about what they're going to have to decide to do with potential tax increases. And I've got some bad news for you, it's not looking great. But before we jump into that, I just want to play you a response. And this response was given shortly after Lord Kinnock on Sky News. Also, this is a report on Sky News responding to this idea that we should have a wealth tax or not. And then you'll probably recognize some of the arguments that are being put forth here because they are not new whatsoever. But this is what was said.
Neil Kinnock has just been talking to us about what the government might do. And he's suggested that the government, it's in a jam, it might need to think about wealth taxes. What do you reckon?
I think it'd be the worst thing to do. We've already had far too many taxes on wealth creation. You look at national insurance, £25 billion burden carried by business. And that's a substantial part of the reason why the economy has not been growing in the way that it should. We've also seen around 10 to 15,000 high net worth individuals leave our country as a result of this government's policies. Now, some people, the socialists might say, oh, well, who cares about that? Well, the problem is that the amount of tax that those people have been paying requires about 1/3 people on average earnings to cover that lost tax that's just gone straight out of the door. So the last thing we want to be doing now is piling further taxes on the wealth creators. We need to be, if anything, getting those taxes down and empowering them to go out and do what they do best, which is creating jobs and creating wealth and prosperity for our country.
Now, I don't want to discredit the points that are being made there because some of those points are valid points in the fact that if you look at the numbers, it is true high net worth individuals, wealthy individuals in society pay the large sum of the tax bill in the UK. That is indisputable. That is absolute fact. However, within this argument, we keep hearing it's not going to work. And we know that Spain imposed a wealth tax for a very brief period of time in literally recent history. And they didn't see a mass exodus of millionaires leaving Spain to go somewhere else. Now, obviously, Spain's very, very different to the UK in terms of weather, climate, that type of stuff, quality of life, standard of living, very, very different in Spain. So that we have all these other kind of nuanced factors to consider in the case of the UK specifically. But I'm sure, despite the fact that we have heard that a lot of wealthy people have left, Labour came out maybe 2 weeks ago, a month ago maybe, saying that that was all just fugazi, that none of it actually happened. Now, when Keir Starmer was asked about this, I'm going to read you his response. So he was asked whether or not he would perhaps support or even consider a wealth tax of some kind. This is what he said. Those with the broadest shoulders carry the greatest burden, and the choices we've made reflect that. Okay, this is the decision that he's made so far, NI contributions in business, so on and so forth. Our progressive tax system means that the top 1% of taxpayers contribute nearly 1/3 of income, that's income tax, with revenue from wealth and asset taxes going towards funding tens of billions of pounds of public service. So his response is very kind of like non-committal on that front. Now, this does now bring us into the sticky situation, the dilemma that they're going to face. If they will not consider a potential wealth tax, or should we recall it asset tax? And I love the way Lord Kinnock kind of framed it as an asset tax. I wonder, just from a perception point of view, if you use asset tax into wealth tax, whether or not that becomes a little bit more palatable, maybe a little bit more acceptable for those people who are in the category that they will be impacted. I don't know. You tell me no. You let me know in the comment section down below. At this point, it's all language, right? So there's no substance. There's nothing substantive about any of this. But if they do refuse to listen to this as a potential proposal, what we're going to see then will be tax rises. And this is a conversation which is now raging in terms of what is Rachel Reeves going to do in autumn. Now, speaking of Rachel Reeves, crying in PMQs last week, I saw all of the pictures. I was traveling. I've seen all of the pictures, and I actually watched the video back, and I don't think it was as bad as the pictures make it out or as what everyone is making it out to be. What I will say, though, is it feels as though, it looks as though she's under a lot of pressure, and maybe the pressure is just getting to her. I mean, being in her role, is almost it's a thankless job. You get it wrong, you're going to get slated. If you get it half right, you're going to get slated. If you get it right, you won't get the credit for it. So as a human being, I sympathize with her, watching her cry, shed a tear, whilst under pressure from Kemi Badenoch, her asking Keir, is she going to be in situ? That must be difficult. But then again, you're in politics. And this is where professionalism comes to play. And look, I don't know the full situation of what was going on with her. Nobody does. But I feel as though there is a huge question mark over her ability now to make the tough decision, given everything that has gone wrong and all the U-turns that Labour have had to perform since they won the election just last year. So now the real topic becomes tax rises. And look, they said they would not increase income tax, national insurance contributions, VAT. Now, on national insurance contributions, they increased that for businesses, right? That was referenced in the report, in the rebuttal, to not have a asset or a wealth tax. But they didn't increase it for taxpayers. Is that going to be on the card? Are they going to increase income tax? There is a stat that I'm looking at right here that says that a 1% or is it a £1 increase to national insurance, income tax would raise a substantial amount of money. I'll actually read this to you. A 1p increase in the basic rate of income tax would raise between 6 and 7 billion a year, but cost a worker earning the average wage of about £35,000 an extra £224 a year based on official estimates. A higher taxpayer would pay at least £377 more a year. Now, those look like small numbers, but when you've got someone who's on breadline, that is really, really hard to swallow. If you're struggling to pay your bills, £224 or £377 a year is still quite a lot of money. Now, the IFS is one of the bodies that works alongside government, advising government on policies and things that they should do. And this is something that the IFS is also commenting on, because after the welfare reform bill essentially being tanked last week, they're estimating that Rachel Reeves is going to have to find around about £30 billion to cover the cost of reversals of the welfare reform and winter fuel payments. £30 billion. So where is that money going to come from if they're not going to introduce an asset tax, wealth tax, or they're going to try and stick to their guns that they're not going to increase taxes on the populace? They are in a very, very, very tricky position indeed. I'd love to know what you think they're going to do. Let me know in the comment section down below. Let's have a conversation, because this is an untenable position. We cannot carry on like this. We need something to be done drastically. But do they have the courage to do it? I don't know. I don't have the confidence, unfortunately. Let me know what you think.